Russian President Vladimir Putin has accused the West of using the Ukrainian crisis as a pretext to impose sanctions against Moscow. In a State of the Union address at the Kremlin, Putin stated that if Kiev hadn't witnessed the coup, Western powers would have come up with other pretexts to contain Russia's potential. The Russian president also said that his country does not respond to the language of force.
Every time someone believes Russia has become too strong, independent, these instruments get applied immediately. The West would have thought up some other excuse to contain Russia's growing possibilities if there had been no tension over Crimea and Ukraine. We will not back down on our position toward the Ukrainian crisis, and we will face all challenges ahead of us.
Putin went on to urge economic self-reliance in the face of U.S.-imposed sanctions, as he offered full amnesty for capital returning to Russia.
Our people have demonstrated national strength, patriotism, and the difficulties we're facing create new opportunities. We are prepared to take any challenge of the time and win.
Meanwhile, the president of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, has labeled Russia as a strategic problem for the European Union. Juncker made the comments amid the ongoing crisis in Ukraine, insisting that Brussels will work to make Moscow a partner again.
Yes, Russia is a strategic problem for the time being. And I hope that tomorrow Russia will be again a strategic partner. Everything the Commission can do in that respect will be done.
This as the Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko has announced a day of silence in eastern Ukraine on December 9th. The move is apparently aimed at having the warring sides in the country secure the previously signed Minsk ceasefire agreement.
It looks like warring factions in eastern Ukraine have extended another lifeline to the faltering ceasefire. The guns will fall silent once again on December 9th, as Kiev and pro-Russian rebels have agreed to halt fire across the eastern war zone. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko announced that his troops would begin withdrawing heavy weapons from the eastern front line, only as long as separatists will also observe the truce. The terms of the new ceasefire will be based on the previous September agreement, with the help of European representatives and Russia. But unlike the Minsk agreement, this deal has a specific date for the two sides to lay down their arms. Meanwhile, at the meeting of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe in the Swiss city of Basel, all sides seemed hopeful, backing the implementation of the Minsk deal.
The Minsk agreement cannot be allowed to face the same fate that befell the February 21st agreement and the Geneva Declaration. The special meaning for rebuilding trust and national reconciliation would be an honest and open investigation of all crimes, including the tragedies of Maidan, Odessa, Mariupol, and the Malaysia Boeing catastrophe.
If the Minsk protocols are seriously implemented, they could be a basis for further political and economic stabilization. And we hope that in the next few days, priority will be given to trying to defuse the situation, and security along the Ukrainian-Russian border will be the next major step.
More than 1,000 people have been killed since the last ceasefire was reached in September. So fingers will be crossed this time, as fears grow in eastern Ukraine that this truce will share the same fate as the previous one.
And to discuss that further, we are joined by Manuel Ochsenreiter. He is a journalist based in Berlin. Manuel, other than a set date to lay down their arms, what is different about this new December 9th ceasefire?
That's a really good question, because the Minsk agreement, and especially the ceasefire agreement, we can just regard it as a very, very big failure. I have been in the region around 4 weeks ago in Lugansk and Donetsk region, and you can see the traces of war everywhere. I was talking to the self-protection units which are active there, and they were reporting from attacks from almost every day. And it's very well known that the fightings at the airport of Donetsk were going on like there was no ceasefire at all. So there were also a lot of attacks, and all these attacks, by the way, coming from the Ukrainian side. So it's a really good question why the ceasefire now should be more reliable. And I think there is a lot of wishful thinking we witness right now from the established politics in the West as well as from the East.
Now, as you call it wishful thinking, do you actually think that Ukraine's forces will withdraw their heavy weaponry from the eastern regions?
That would be a really, really huge miracle, because Ukraine was doing exactly the contradiction of that. Ukraine was using the ceasefire, the more or less ceasefire truce, for regrouping its armies, for reinforcement at, well, let us say, at the front line. There is no real front line, but there are, of course, Ukrainian army bases. So we have to see that when we look at both parties, at both war parties on the battleground, we have on the one side the Ukrainian party, on the other side the Novorossiya party, the Donetsk and Lugansk party. They have two complete different strategic agendas. The Ukrainian army, the Ukrainian leadership has an offensive agenda. Ukraine never, even with the truce and the ceasefire, they never gave up their cause, that they said, we will reconquer those areas now in power of the self-defense units. And Ukraine even announced to take back Crimea. How they will do that, they didn't say, but that it will not go without firing one shot. That must be clear. On the other side, we have the self-defense units, we have the People's Republics of Donetsk and Lugansk, and we can say they have a defensive agenda. They want to secure their independence, and they want to have guarantees for their independence. So although there is a ceasefire, there is until now no political agreement how the future of this area will look like.
So what are the chances of national reconciliation here with such atrocities having been committed throughout the duration of this conflict?
The big obstacle is, as I said, is the different strategic orientation of both parties. That means as long the agenda will not change, there will be no, we cannot expect any long-term peaceful development in the region. And as we see is that the West is right now supporting Ukraine, and the West is supporting Ukraine with its offensive strategic agenda in the region. And so Kiev has until now no reason to give up their agenda and to go into talks. And the other side, we have the people in Lugansk and in Donetsk who can't imagine anymore to live within one state as before 2013 in a Ukrainian state, together with that regime, which was doing bombardments, which was doing snipering against civilians. There was a lot of bloodshed, and every drop of blood on the ground in Donetsk and in Lugansk made the chance for an agreement with both parts smaller and smaller. So as long Kiev will not change its agenda, there will be no peace. There might be maybe a more or less successful ceasefire, maybe for some days or maybe even for some weeks. It depends on how good it will be implemented and how good it will be observed. But until now, there is no political agreement in sight.
Now let's talk a bit about Putin's State of the Union address. He accused the West of using Ukraine as a pretext to sanction Russia, and that means the West has Kremlin in its crosshairs no matter what Putin says or does.
Yes, I think Putin is right with his analysis, or with the analysis of his advisors, because when we go back a little bit in the days when the Maidan started, we can say very clear that the Maidan, as it developed, wouldn't have been possible without Western meddling. When we see how much Western NGOs were meddling in Ukraine, not just in 2013, but even before, we had the so-called Orange Revolution already 10 years ago, when we see how much meddling there was in the interest sphere, in the clear interest sphere of Russia, we can say that there was the attempt of the West to break the whole Ukraine out of the sphere, out of the planned Eurasian tax union, which can just function, by the way, if there is a peaceful border in the West. So this is what is happening right now there, but I think we will see and we will witness such developments also in other areas in Russia or at the Russian border. I think it won't take long anymore until we will have a sort of rioting in Belarus right now, a faithful partner, by the way, of Russia, but there are developments and maybe also in other areas. We shouldn't forget today was a terrorist attack in Chechnya, in Grozny, in the Chechnyan capital. All these are things they wouldn't be possible without a strong Western support.
All right, we are going to have to leave it there. That is Manuel Ochsenreiter. He is a journalist in Berlin. Thanks a lot.